Hello, my wonderful, beautiful friends, guys. Welcome back to r/EntitledPeople, where people truly believe they can do no wrong and the world revolves around them. And in this episode, it's a head shaker, guys. We've got Karens throwing tantrums in public, destroying their own careers, people thinking they own the neighborhood they live in, and one Karen lets her son trespass on OP's property and she's trying to sue him in the end. Guys, I hope you enjoy the stories today. Don't shake your heads too hard. And as always, you can send or link your post to this email right here. Let's dive in. Okay, so this happened months ago when my wife and I went to the movie theater during a busy movie weekend. So we got to the theater and it was packed. We got in line for popcorn and there was probably 50 people ahead of us. The line was way into the lobby, but it was moving relatively quickly. I think we waited like 10 to 15 minutes. This dude and his wife are there with their granddaughter, who must have been 10 to 12 years old. Seems nice, right? Grandparents taking their granddaughter to the movies, but just wait. We're towards the front of the line when this guy looks back and forth and casually sidesteps in front of us with his back turned. I was shocked that I witnessed a grown man cutting in line. This is when a mom and her kid right next to him calls him out on it. The mother says to the guy, "Sir, the line starts back there. We've been waiting a while. You can't cut." The guy actually loses it on her and he screams saying, "Do you see how effing long this line is? What am I, supposed to wait this whole effing time? We're late for our movie." And seriously, you could sense his anger just ramping up by the second. Very bizarre. The mom says to him, "We waited, they waited, it's not fair to cut. It's not that bad, the line's moving." The guy's mumbling at this point and then raises his voice and he says something along the lines of, "You know what? F you, and F you." The guy's pointing his finger at everyone behind him. And he says, "I'm done with this crap." The mother just responds, "Sir, there are children here. Can you please not swear like that?" The guy then grabs his granddaughter's hand and rushes off to the hallway with the theater entrances, all the while screaming, "I guess she's not getting any popcorn today." The guy left his wife standing there all alone. She looked so embarrassed and then walked to follow them. The absolute entitlement to think it's acceptable for him to cut in line and use that language at people in front of many kids and his own granddaughter. He's certainly demonstrating appropriate behavior for her. I feel bad for his family that has to deal with him. I totally agree. I feel so bad for the granddaughter having to watch granddad lose his marbles at random people and not getting popcorn and drinks for the movie. Like seriously, there are 2 adults there, so do the thing that everyone does. If you're late for your movie, send grandma and granddaughter to go pick seats while you wait in line. Or whoever, right? Like, why make a huge scene? Okay, so I'm absolutely livid and I need to get this off my chest. I'm a millennial dad of 2, and I've never had such a horrid interaction directly with anyone in public until today. My wife and I took our 2 kids, ages 2 and 5, to get haircuts today at a barber shop. I figured we'd be in and out in 30 minutes and go on with our day. So we come in, sit down to wait, and both kids are behaving and waiting patiently. An older man walks in after we check in, and he sits down to wait. My 5-year-old gets her haircut in about 5 minutes, no issue, and then sits back down. Now, my 2-year-old hates getting his hair cut, so I sat down in the chair to hold him while the stylist worked on it. Cue the screaming. My 2-year-old was non-stop freaking out the whole time, which only took like 5 minutes total. And also, we're not entirely sure, but he's very sensitive about being touched, and he may be on the spectrum to some extent, but it's still too early to tell. There was another family there as well, getting their son's haircut, and their son was also on the spectrum. He was doing better than my 2-year-old, but yelling loudly on occasion. Well, this is when the man gets called up to get his haircut, and he was seated next to us on the other side of a divider wall, so I couldn't see him directly. About 5 minutes into his haircut, I heard him yell, "Mother effer," but I couldn't hear what else he was saying over the crying and screaming. He finishes his haircut quickly and then walks up to the counter, and this time I could hear him very clearly. The guy was yelling loudly saying, "It's effing ridiculous that I come here to get my hair cut and I have to listen to this effing BS while getting a haircut. This is what's wrong with some parents. There is no discipline." He then looks at me and says, "I would have choked out my kid before I let him scream like that." He then continued to go on a tirade about it. Well, hearing him say that to me, my wife was rightfully pissed and she started losing it on him. She literally told him to get the F out and we'll pay for his haircut if it gets him to stop being a man-child throwing a tantrum about a 2-year-old getting a haircut. He just kept screaming and paid for his own haircut. The guy then sat back down in the waiting area to spite my wife. The other kid's mom chimed in, saying he was being ridiculous and the other child was still yelling. The old guy then proceeds to talk about how all these kids are effing autistic now and they can't handle anything, and that we should be, quote, beating them into submission. My wife is still yelling at him about how much of an entitled idiot he is. Meanwhile, I just stayed quiet, deciding it would be best to not have both of my kids' parents losing their mind at this guy. The staff was visibly upset and they apologized for the situation. We then paid and left, and the guy stayed inside. My wife and I were both fuming when we got home. The salon did call us and they were apologizing profusely, saying that they contacted corporate and the guy was placed on a list of customers they won't serve at any location. I don't know how enforceable that is, but it was nice to hear. We also let the salon know that we understand it's not their fault. They said they would let the kids come back for free haircuts next time, which was nice of them. My wife did apologize for yelling, but they let her know it was justified and they knew he was the problem. I just can't believe that I actually witnessed this entitled stupidity firsthand, and it was about my kids too. It takes a lot of strength to hold everything back emotionally for the sake of your kids. My wife and I have been distraught about this the whole day, and I just needed to vent. You know what, if I were in OP's shoes, I would be super mad too. Like, what parent would not be upset? And honestly, I sure as heck hope he wasn't enforcing what he was saying to OP. Like, the guy literally said, I would have beat my kids into submission. I would have choked them out before they screamed like that. Like, really? You would do that to a 2-year-old who's screaming, sir. And I do get it. Some people hate hearing kids in public, and they're all about the children are to be seen and not heard. But I think that man crossed the line with what he said. Guys, let me know your thoughts. So this happened a couple of years ago around Thanksgiving, and all of these crazy tales reminded me of my encounter with a drunk Karen. It's a long story, but bear with me. For some context, I work a high-stress job that involves a fair amount of direct conflict. Before that, I worked as a bartender for 5 years, so my empathy is higher for those working in hospitality. Further, my childhood wasn't great, so I do have some anger issues, but my awesome wife has made me go to therapy. I can't thank her enough. It's helped me tremendously, and I recommend it to anyone. That said, my local bar is a quarter mile from my house, so I walked over after a particularly frustrating day, and I sat down for a drink to unwind. The bartender and I have been friends for a few years now, and I could tell he was stressed. The bar is a U-shape, and on the other side from where I'm sitting is a drunk Karen and her sad husband in their early 60s. The woman's visibly intoxicated, she's loud and obnoxious. Her husband looks like this isn't the first time this has happened, and he's fully given up on controlling the beast. I'm just checking the news on my phone and sipping my whiskey, when out of nowhere I hear, "No! I gave you my effing card, and if you don't have it, you stole it. You bunch of good-for-nothing idiots in this place." This is when I glance up, and I see Karen now standing, and she's pointing at the bartender menacingly. Karen's husband is still sitting with his head staring at the bar, trying to look as small as possible. The bartender's not one who deals with direct conflict well, and he's really easygoing. He's a nice guy. He says to Karen, "Ma'am, again, you gave me your business card, not your credit card. I can't charge this, so please give me another form of payment to close you out." Now, this error doesn't register in her brain whatsoever, and at this point, the 20 or so people in there are all staring, but they're not doing anything. My anger is now at a 5 out of 10, but I keep quiet, assessing the situation from afar. Meanwhile, Karen's getting angrier by the second. She says to the guy, "How dare you? I gave you my card and you're a thief. A lying thief, and I'm gonna get you fired." The woman was slurring every single word. At this point, the bartender's visibly trembling as he's the only one managing the place. And like I said, he doesn't have a malicious bone in his body. My anger is now at a 7.5, and I'm trying to think of a way to defuse this, but my fists are starting to clench while my blood pressure rises. At this point, the two kitchen staff have come out from the back to investigate the commotion, and they're looking wide-eyed. A regular patron to the right of Karen then tries to explain her drunken error, and she berates him. Karen loudly proclaims that the bartender 100% stole her card, and he should be arrested. The whole bar is now quiet, and this is when I lost it. I stand up, and I point at her from across the bar, and I shout, "Who the F do you think you are, you stupid entitled C-word? The bartender's told you 3 times you gave him your business card. This guy's tried to tell you you gave him a business card. So what the F is wrong with you? Pay your tab and get the F out so people can enjoy their evening and not listen to your annoying voice." Cue the 5 seconds of silence, and all eyes are now on me. And I'm thinking, well, F it, this woman deserved it. The bartender's stunned, but he looks somewhat relieved, and then amazingly, Karen begins to argue with me. I cut her off mid-sentence, still fuming, and I tell her, "Shut up, you don't get to speak anymore. You're wasted and you're making no sense whatsoever. So pay your tab and get out." I then direct my anger at her husband, and I say to him, "You, what are you doing? Your wife is clearly drunk, so help her pay the tab and get her out of here. How are you still here?" Meanwhile, Karen's rambling drunken gibberish at me. Karen's husband finally pulls out his card. The guy pays the tab and then physically escorts her out, as she continues to yell profanities at myself, the bartender, cursing the whole bar and everyone staring at her. I just pick my phone back up and begin to finish my whiskey, still loaded with adrenaline. I'm shaking. The bartender comes up to me and he silently mouths, "Thank you," while handing me some sort of shot, while the tension in the bar starts to die down. Not 30 seconds later, I get a strong tap on my shoulder. I turn around, and it's the regular patron standing behind me. I'm expecting no conflict, as we're familiar with each other, so I say, "Hey," and ask him what's up. And this is when he screams at me saying, "How dare you call that woman a C-word? That was completely uncalled for." The guy's aggressively standing a foot from my face. He's huffing his chest and invading my personal space. And this is the point where I'm standing again, steam billowing out of my ears. I say to him, "Really? If you're that effing offended, why don't we step outside and chat? Then you can tell me how you really feel." At this point, the bartender rushes over, and he interjects before it escalates any further. The bartender says to him, "Hey, he did nothing wrong. You need to stop. That woman was vile, and he's the one who got her out of here. So go back to your seat, please, or cash out and leave." The guy shuffles back to his seat. I sit back down, thank the bartender, and apologize for exploding, saying that my day was already crap before all this happened. He just waves it off and tells me this tab's on him and smiles. He then walks over to the register and then comes back and hands me her business card. He then says to me, "You know what, I'm surprised she was acting like this." And I found out she's an attorney, and I'm thinking, wow, you probably know where this story's going. The next day, I find the contact info of her firm's partner, and I email him what happened. I received no response back. However, I did check Karen's LinkedIn page after the new year. She had stopped working at the firm in December. If it was karma, who knows, but I hope she was fired or had to resign, because she deserved it wholeheartedly. I totally agree, and honestly, if that woman was as unpleasant as the story suggests, I wouldn't be surprised if OP's email was the final straw that ended her career. Like, that is no way to represent the professional firm you work at, and what a mistake that woman made giving that guy her business card. And I do agree with OP when they say it probably wasn't the first time it's happened, considering how her husband looked. Like the guy 1000% knew it was best to keep quiet in that situation. A few years ago, I lived in a subdivision filled with older folk. In the 4 years we lived there, I would take my girls on walks, and there were 2 other families in the entire subdivision with kids. The rest were all retirees. When the kids would ride their bikes in the road, we would get yelled at for being in the road. When they rode on the sidewalks, we would get yelled at for being on the sidewalk. If they picked a dandelion from a yard, we would get yelled at for messing with their landscaping. Everyone was so entitled. So that said, my neighbor was an old retired army man who did whatever he wanted, and people never said no, apparently. The guy didn't like the trash pickup because it would damage his lawn, so he would just roll his waste buckets on my property. He would also get political signs and put them in my property. His fence was too short on the side of his house to have a gate, so we had one on the side facing my property, and he would take everything through my yard, including his four-wheelers, his lawnmower, etc. Now, I'm of the opinion that a yard is just a yard, so I didn't really care. But I had my trees maintained professionally. I also had lawn care, kept my yard mowed, and generally didn't pay much attention to his complaints, other than to say, okay, I'll keep an eye on that. That said, my wife absolutely has no spatial awareness, and she's a terrible parker. She's the type that pulls forward into a parallel spot, and she leaves the tail sticking out, and she has to get back in to readjust. She's the type that pulls into a wide open spot and somehow still gets the wheels on the line. One time, she was backing out of the driveway and one of her wheels cut through the grass. And this was it. This was the most terrible thing that my entitled neighbor could imagine happening. The guy immediately rages at her, and then he comes up to me and he screams that he won't be having any more of that mud, that it's making his yard a mud pit and women should not drive. The guy's spewing all sorts of nonsense. He then said if I don't fix my wife's driving, then he'll get a truckload of rocks and dump them on my driveway, so we won't use it anymore. I'm livid at him yelling, but I had enough of his complaining a couple of months ago, and I got an official survey. So I tell him to stay right there. We'll talk more in a minute. So I go inside, grab the extra copy of the survey I had for just this occasion, and then take it outside and hand it to him. I then explain how he can feel free to dump as much rocks as he wants on his own property. And this is when I take a few steps forward onto the lawn, and I show him exactly where the line ends. I then tell him if he takes one step over the line from now on, I'll have him trespassed. I then point out that his gate butts up against the actual property line, so he can't use it anymore. And that driveway is mine, and he also can't use it anymore. I then told him if his trash bins end up on my yard again, I'll call the city and have them removed so he can go down and get new ones. The guy's now beet red, and he tells me I can't tell him what to do with his gate, and how is he supposed to mow the lawn or get his four-wheelers out? I just shrug and tell him, try me. That was the last time we ever spoke. About a year later, some guys came to do some work on his house, and they were going up my driveway, and I told them, no, you have to use his property, and then gave them the history. I could tell that they were annoyed at me for making their life harder, but they end up having to drive their big lifter through his lawn, and they ground up all of his grass, going up and down that hill multiple times. And honestly, it just felt good watching his lawn become a mud pit. We moved just a couple of months later, and although now it feels petty, before we left, I left a card at his house and said how much we appreciated how kind his wife was, and that we hoped his new neighbors would treat him with as much care and respect as he had afforded us. I saw him at Home Depot this morning, looking grumpy as ever, and it made me want to post. You know what they say, play stupid games, win stupid prizes. And I just love stories where entitled neighbors get into silly little property disputes and they end up getting destroyed in the end. That said though, despite the wild shenanigans the neighbor was pulling, OP mentioning how crappy of a driver his wife is really stuck with me. Maybe she needs a refresher course on how to handle a vehicle. So I have a koi pond in my backyard, But it's not any koi pond. It's a full-blown, professionally designed Japanese garden with a bridge, waterfalls, and koi that cost more than my car. I'm talking $1,000 for a single fish. Maintaining this pond is my pride and joy. I've put years into this hobby, and my yard is securely fenced with no trespassing signs everywhere. Enter my neighbor, Karen. Karen has a son who we'll call Timmy. The kid's 8 years old, who's notorious for wandering into people's backyards uninvited. Now, I have talked to Karen multiple times about this, but she just brushes it off and she says kids will be kids. She never does anything about it. That said, last week, while I was out running errands, I got a frantic call from Karen. Apparently, Timmy had climbed over my fence to feed my fish, even though I've explicitly told him to stay out. In doing so, Timmy slips, falls into the pond, and destroys part of my carefully maintained ecosystem. Several of my prize koi died due to stress, and the filtration system was damaged because of debris Timmy kicked in. Now, luckily, Timmy wasn't seriously hurt, just a few scrapes, but Karen's been demanding I pay for his medical bills, and if not, she plans to take it to court. She claims that my pond is an attractive nuisance, that I should have had a cover or something to prevent kids from falling in. I argued that 1, it's a private fence property, and 2, her son had no business being there in the first place. When I refused to pay, Karen lost it. She started bad-mouthing me to the whole neighborhood, calling me a heartless and terrible person. I've since filed a lawsuit against her for the cost of the koi, the damage to my filtration system, and repairs to my pond. Over $5,000 in total. Some of my friends think I'm taking it too far, saying he's just a kid. Stuff like that happens. But others agree that Karen should have been watching him better. So am I the a-hole for suing my neighbor after her kid trespassed and destroyed my koi pond? Yeah, OP's definitely not the a-hole in this situation. Even I'm a forgiving person, guys, but when it comes to a koi pond that's worth thousands of dollars, I believe the person who destroyed it has to face the consequences, especially after OP told Karen many times to supervise her son better. And at 8 years old, the kid's old enough to understand that he's not supposed to climb a fence onto a property that's not theirs. And seriously, I would have laughed in Karen's face if I were OP. Like, your son trespasses onto my property, he got hurt and destroyed my pond, and you think I owe you money. And the fact that Karen was like, oh, your pond is a hazard, it's too nice, it attracts people into your yard. People are ridiculous, I tell you. And guys, the comment of this post with over 19,000 people agreeing says, poor fishes died of shock. Why would anyone think that's okay or not a big deal? And the kid could have died too if it was a pool or something. She doesn't want to take care of the kid. She doesn't want to control him or anything. When will she stop? And she's right, he's just a kid, but she's not. The issue is not the kid, it's the mother. Saying he's just a kid is a deflection of her responsibility. OP should sue her. Maybe she'll become a better parent to not have to pay others' future messes. Also, add a camera. Somehow, I don't think it'll be beyond her to damage your property in retaliation. If anyone says anything to you again, tell them you're doing it for the kid because his mom needs to change and to try to prevent more pointless deaths, not the a-hole. Again, I totally agree. Kids will be kids is the biggest cop-out because I know for a fact that 8-year-olds are frickin' smart, guys, and they do know better. So yeah, I don't think anyone would think OP's the a-hole in the situation because koi fish are frickin' expensive and that accident was totally preventable. Let me know your thoughts. And that, my friends, brings us to another end of our / entitled people. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's stories. If you did, hit that thumbs up. And if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing so you don't miss these crazy stories. And if you missed the last episode on the channel, it's in our / malicious compliance episode, where bosses are getting absolutely destroyed. Guys, go check it out if you haven't. And myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.